and welcome to another episode of Educast 3000. I am your co-host, Ryan Lufkin.
And I'm your co-host, Melissa Loble. And today, both Ryan and I are super excited to have our guest join us. We've known this guest for quite a long time and are really inspired by the work he's done. So we're thrilled to have Sanjay Srivastava with us today. He is CEO of Vocareum, but has a long history in both technology and education. And so we're going to pick his brain today around the intersection of technology education, the future of work and coding, and what does this all mean for educators and how we think differently about perhaps what the future of teaching and learning looks like. So Sanjay, it's so good to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Awesome. Well, Sanjay, before we jump into the hard-hitting questions, give us a little bit about your background and so our audience gets to know you a little better.
Yeah, sure. So I took a somewhat normal path to Silicon Valley, which as I did my undergrad in India and IIT. And then I was very, very fortunate to get invited to the computer vision lab for my PhD in University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And I was there for about three and a half years. And I, at that point, I realized instead of finishing my PhD, I really wanted to go code for a living. So those days, this is like 1990 or 1989. And I asked a friend of mine in Silicon Valley to send me a classified section of San Jose Mercury News. And he sent it to me. Those are deep, the moment of deep recession. So I sent 50 resumes to anyone who wanted to say coding. I didn't care about what it was, what language, what the domain was. I sent about 50 resumes. Thankfully, I got one interview. There's a company called Vantage Analysis Systems. They were doing semiconductor design, and I came to Silicon Valley. And I got really lucky in hindsight. As you can see, none of it was planned, but I got really lucky in a couple of ways that, my first boss was amazing. So, and I do think that your first boss can actually make or break your career in a lot of ways. They can really either build your confidence or not. And the company was awesome. They were like, when we were sold about 4 years later, there were 45 people in the company. And I was counting later on, about 18 of them went on to have titles of CEO, right? I mean, this was just crazy entrepreneurial, culture with lots of smart people. So I knew I wanted to start a company. So 4 of us got together. Between us, we had $10,000. So we pooled it and started a company called Denali Software. 2 people quit. The 2 of us who were the youngest one had the least to lose. We kept going, and that was semiconductor design space. In 2010, I was fortunate enough to have have sold the company for $315 million. Still looking for that return from. and then in 2012, I sold another company called Envulo, which was in system software, to Samsung. And and that was the moment I realized I was too young to retire, but I wanted to combine, I want to continue my passion for building, companies. But this time I wanted to do something which had, real sense of purpose to it, right? So I ended up saying, okay, let's build something in education space. And that's what Vocareum was formed in 2014. And here I am, So that's the journey.
Amazing.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. And the comment about your first boss, I can think of my first education boss and how much that influenced who I am today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Other things that influence us can be teaching or learning moments. So we're curious. We ask all of our guests, is there a moment, a favorite moment, or a moment you remember in your life where you were learning something and it was impactful, where you were teaching something that was impactful, or where you observed something, and you saw the impact of teaching and learning. So would you mind sharing maybe a favorite moment with us?
So mine is probably going to be a little unusual, right? So as I was, it was not a moment, but it was an environment. So, I was saying that when I was there in India, we had a computer center and you could one mainframe and you had to reserve a terminal. So late at night, you go there just so that you can do some, programming on this, it's like a really silly terminal, which is really slow. And then I ended up coming to Urbana-Champaign in the computer vision lab. And I was dropped in this environment with workstation all around me. And then, we just had acquired a Pixar machine, which was before, Steve Jobs bought it and converted it to animation movie.
Yeah.
And it was, I just realized I'm having so much fun coding that, so having the access to that hands-on space so for me, that was a big deal. So when I had the opportunity, I went back and, contributed to something called a design lab back in alma mater, because to me, that was a big deal, having, peers around, your PhD advisor around, your research assistant, but more importantly, all in, a space where you can actually do real work.
Yeah.
So,
I love that.
That's great.
And while you may think it's unusual, I think that's really timely and actually really connected to our conversation, because so much what we're hearing about the change in education is this, does that need to have it be experiential, right? And you need to be embedded, and you need to be able to code and practice and get excited about that. So let me exactly. And just have fun. Like, I think that's so cool that you're having just fun in learning. So, but it's a good place to start. So we're all hearing, and maybe this is a little bit of an elephant in the room, but we're all here. I mean, there's AI coding assistants are here, right? So much. There's this debate in the space around what role will being able to code play in the workplace. But even more than that, I've heard a number of like department heads of CS, ask, well, what's my role now? What should I be teaching? So what are some of the big, or what's the fundamental shift that you're seeing we're living through right now in computer science education more broadly?
Yes, I mean, the education system, as you can imagine, right? I mean, still has to react, because things are moving so fast, right? But in some ways, I think about when I started Vocareum, it was like, we had a first set of pilots in 2014. The big deal in those days used to be about computing literacy, right? Everyone was talking about everyone needs to learn how to code.
Yeah.
And especially high schools, states were talking about making it at least part of the requirement. And then the computer science enrollment was exploding in the space. So at least at that moment, we went through one set of transformation. The second one, at least from what we observed, was around data science and data literacy. So there's again a large need, especially in business schools, saying, okay, we all need to become data literate, right? We can't, which did mean some element of coding. So lots of business schools. So the moment I think we are going through, it's one of those at least moments in my life where you see extreme euphoria and seeing extreme panic both at the same time, right? So at least in from a literacy perspective, it was never really about learning how to code. I mean, because that was the easy part, right? So it was about how you code in the context of a system. So that's kind of when you learn your foundational computer science literacy, right? You worried about scaling and cybersecurity and all that, right? And then over time, SaaS, you start worrying about like, how do I bring design thinking into my coding process, right? And right now it's about AI, right? And I do believe that and I'm sure we'll talk further about it, but it's a big moment, but there are lots of components to it, right? Number one, the easy one is we all have to get productive, right? We all have to know how to use AI. There are some crazy things which you hear, which is like Anthropic, especially coming from Anthropic, that all these stories about they're hiring 100 computer engineers, but nobody's going to code. They're all going to be, just sort of telling someone else, like their agents, to code. But I think the AI literacy is a big deal. But I do believe that the change is still, from a computer science discipline perspective, I think you still need to learn the systems, and you need to learn AI deeply.
So we hear that analogy of programmers now are really more the conductor of the orchestra rather than the players of the individual instruments. But how are we still need to teach students how the instruments work, how the instruments play, right? What does that shift in teaching look like? Is that an apt analogy that they're going to be the conductors?
So, again, the computer science, if you think about it, right, especially going forward, I mean, the computer scientists will be needed for lots of different things, just as, in the context of AI, right? you will need people, of course, who will be building AI. So you have to have a deep understanding about how do you build AI, not only just the generative AI, but the AI of the future. Obviously there's an autonomy, but more and more we start thinking about physical AI. So that's one element to it, right? But going back to the agent orchestration, what is exciting is I think how our customers, especially in the when people who are using technology now have the ability to write agents and orchestrate agents, right? So as far as if you're a computer scientist yourself, I think the pressure right now is to get whatever 25-30% productivity from AI, right? And which could mean 40-50-60% of their code is written by AI, but you still be in charge, and I'm just trying to just you will not let AI just say, go do this whole thing for me, but you'll say, suggest changes, suggest architectures, and you'll approve, you'll manage it. So that's certainly a skill, right? But it still needs a deep understanding, and you'll be doing it at the level at which you need a deep understanding that AI is doing the right thing. Now, I do believe your customers, I think that's where it gets a lot of fun. So for the first time in like about 30 years, I decided to go build some agents myself, right? Like, so one of my problems used to be in business, like, you send all these emails and sometimes people don't respond and you're like always under pressure. Did I track this one? So I said, let me write an agent to go through my emails every morning and say, hey, who has not responded? And give me a quick summary about them, right? And another agent was like in a Slack, if your customer lead is coming in, go make some guesses about estimation about how important this lead is, and tell me research on the customer. And the third one was I wanted to try writing a mobile app for Vocareum, just something simple. And what is amazing about all these three projects, it took me about 2 to 3 hours to do them each, right? And I touched about 8 or 9 different pieces of technology, Slack APIs, Gmail APIs, going back, deploying on AWS. And it was an eye-popping moment or whatever, right? So going back to, going back to your question about agents, I do think our customers, if you're in sales and finance, everyone on customer support, you will. So again, the realization was amazingly easy to write it. The second realization immediately afterwards, like, oh man, it's so risky, right? Because you're giving these agents all these credentials to go do this on my behalf. Yeah. So you can't. So I don't know what the world will look like, but the agents will have to be written, and it can be done without without the proper kind of controls and guardrails and knowledge and processes. And going back to the question, computer science, I do think will play, they will play a critical role in how these agents get created and how they get measured, how they get orchestrated.
Yeah, that's awesome. Speaking of computer science and thinking about that, let's say you were going to hire students or you're going to hire students after they've graduated and they have a computer science degree. What skills would you expect them to have? You're starting to touch on that, right? Some of this is around being able to build and leverage the technology. But what are some of the skills that you would expect now out of a computer science student as opposed to that might have been needed 10, 15 years ago?
So if I was, that's an interesting question. And also in some ways, it speaks to one of the real stress in the system, right? I don't know whether you guys saw that UC is the first time the computer science enrollment declined.
Yes.
And I think partly it's happening, in some ways pretty unfortunate, because partly it's happening because the jobs market for new graduates is like really bad. Now, it's bad across the board, but because we live in such a kind of a tech-heavy world, that what's getting really amplified is the struggle with the computer science graduates are having, right? But going back to your question about like what skill, I would want them to demonstrate as much as possible deep understanding of AI, which means what AI is capable of, but equally as important, a more sophisticated understanding of what AI is not capable of, right? And when it's not a replacement for human judgment. It's just a tool, and you demonstrate that by hopefully having done projects just like we used to look for apps in the GitHub, hopefully the project we'll be looking for is agents. Have you built agents? Can you talk intelligently about it? So I think that's what we'll be looking for. And if they don't have it, come and we'll bring them over and we'll train them. But that's kind of the starting skill.
I think that's really important. I think there's a oversimplification of AI and the level of oversight it still requires that I think a lot of people need to be educated on. But when we talk about education and AI and education specifically, the debate is raging right now around whether AI is a shortcut to learning, is creating paths around actual learning, or whether it lowers the barriers to access and democratizes access to learning. What is your take on that, and where do you see that going?
So this is actually an exciting question, and we got very, very fortunate that about 2 years ago, UCSD, they were doing some research around a very specific problem, which is the math literacy. How do you go and how do you go address what they were seeing and this increasing problem of people coming in not having sort of a middle school or high school level math literacy, and they're trying to ask the question, could AI help, right? And it was really exciting to go through this process, and obviously, they are now talking about it, that in the last version of this pre-calc course, with all the cohorts being, so you're going with same cohort, same sort of entry score, and the failure rate went down by something like 70% or whatever. Right. So I do believe that I don't think there's any doubt in my mind, and I think there's enough research out there already to say that AI, if implemented with the proper scaffolding and the intentionality, and obviously you can talk about in more detail, it is enabler, right? Especially in terms of just providing access and improving outcomes. Yeah.
Yeah, if we can, I'd like to dig into that a little deeper. So how is it an enabler? Because to Ryan's point, we're also hearing a lot of, and I've been in conversations where education leaders are like, how do we just make them stop using AI?
Yeah.
Or they only use AI in the agents that I give them in my context. Yep. And the cat's out of the bag. Like they're not stopping to use AI. So you talked about enablers. Like, how are you thinking, and how does that actually maybe even show up with Vocareum? Like, how do you think about getting students to use AI in the right and more meaningful ways to actually add to their learning experiences?
So the experiment which we did, and if you found what does not work in some ways, start with, right? So the two things, in my opinion, that don't work, right? If you put an AI tutor out there or whatever, then the students will go just not use it, or they will use chatbot. I mean, and it might be slightly controversial take, and maybe people would not like it, but the whole idea, that my tutor, all that it is doing is making sure that the domain of knowledge it is using to serve you is more restricted than what's available. So the entire, so I joke about it all the time. Give me some money, and all that I will do is make sure it does less, So
yes.
that, yes. So that is, I think that was, and that's okay. That was a version, not 1.0, but 0.1 version of deploying AI, right? The other thing which I don't think it works, and that was kind of an eye-opening, right? There's all sorts of research out there which can say, the student engaged with this tutor or this chatbot for 30 minutes or so a week, their education outcome, it will increase by a grade or something, right? But then what I think people start discovering it, and some people are calling it a 5% problem, that if you just leave it there, then only 5% of the students will go use it, right? And those are the 5% students who don't need it, right? So the conclusion is the AI needs to be deeply integrated into the teaching and learning environment, right? So the way, at least the deployment that I was talking about, what the educators decided, the way they do this deployment, that the first assignment which is given, they have the scaffolded AI tutor deeply integrated with the assignment. So when they try to do a work, it pops up and saying, hey, can I help you here? And by the way, and it's personalized, so it knows what they know. It has a full context. Mm-hmm. So then we see that the engagements with the tutor just goes through the roof, right? Yeah. The students who are afraid to ask questions or might, will actually ask the AI, right? So we have seen the numbers, and pretty exciting. And these are the students who who would otherwise might actually, the failure rate on some of these classes like 50-60%, right? And we have dropped it down to whatever 10%, whatever. So that was, so in the deployment was you do an assignment with maybe AI tutor there, maybe you do a practice test with AI tutor, and then maybe, but you still you're accountable for your learning, because then there will be a test which is higher stakes where there'll be no AI there or whatever, right? And it's personalized. It actually tracks what the digital twin, and again, there's a whole architecture that we have implemented, right, on what the student knows and what doesn't know. So if you integrate, again, the long answer, so it's basically you have to integrate into the current learning architecture, right, where there are assignments and there are grades, and AI is sitting there as an aid, right, rather than something on the side.
So, and I love that aspect of it, because the next question then is, we've seen very recently there was an article about someone that created an agent to take their course for them, take their quiz for them. We know that there's tools like Goth AI that you can literally take a picture of your screen and it'll give you the answers. How do we evolve how we're measuring mastery of skill in this day and age? Like, there's no silver bullet, but like, how do we need to evolve that approach?
So, that's a really complicated question, right? And I mean, I don't know the answer, but it was kind of exciting. So I went back to University of Illinois, my alma mater, right, about a couple of months ago, and they had invested, in this, and this is obviously all pre-AI, but computer-based testing facility, what they call CBTF, right? And in this engineering school, and there, any faculty could ask us, like, go ahead and take this test there, and it's completely monitored and locked down. And the use for that has just gone through the roof, right? So for summative assessment, at least, I think that's what people are doing. But in my opinion, what is exciting about it is that the formative assessment is now, it's like, let's go out there, focus on learning, because, and I see there are two concrete examples of that. One is what I just mentioned in the summative assessment is now a formative assessment now about you mastery, you getting AI driven mastery of a concept. The teacher says, I want you to go out there and demonstrate mastery of this, and by the way, if you cheat there, it doesn't matter, because your assessment, which will most of it counts with your grade, will be completely proctored and all that, right? So that's one formula. Another customer asked for it, which we haven't implemented. We are excited about it. Like, you will write code, and then you will have you'll get an auto-graded answer for grading, but then you will be asked, AI driven, of course, it to explain different portions of your code, and the AI will provide you with feedback on that one, right? And so that's kind of exciting. Again, it's just helping a student learn. And of course, how do you grade? It seems like the only answer for now is just to go, lockdown.
Yeah, lockdown browser, go back to Blue Books. I was looking for a stat on how much the sale of Blue Books had increased since over the last 3 years. I'm still trying to find that one, because I do think there's a number of, we're going to go analog, because that's the only way you can figure out. I think there are better solutions than that. We just haven't quite figured them out.
Right.
Yeah. And I think some of that comes from authentic assessment. And I would argue that in a lot of the computer science work, and now I am not a computer science, I do not hold that degree. So, but in watching and learning from this, I think authentic assessment has been embedded in that discipline in certain ways. I certainly know Vocareum is very much about authentic experiences, but I think a lot of other disciplines haven't gone that direction. They're still using the same multiple choice test from 20 years ago because they feel like those facts are the most important things to know. And maybe in some cases they are, but where does authentic assessment play in your mind? How do you think about that, or how have you thought about that as you've tried to solve, in particular, computer science and coding education?
So as you pointed out, Melissa, so one of the biggest thing which we focused on Vocareum, the only thing which we focused on is providing an experiential environment which is as close to real world as possible, which means that you get real tools, you do real projects, and then you enable the faculty to go, assess that, right? For students to work on that and assess that. There is still a challenge of scale, right? If you do, and that's somewhat unsolved problem, that if you have 20 or 30 students in a class, that's one thing, right? But if you start having, which is unfortunate thing about a lot of our events, that the beginning lower division classes tends to be hundreds of students. I remember walking to like a computer science department of one of major R1s, and they had an org chart of their CS1 class. It was something like 1,400 student.
Oh,
This was the
geez.
bigger. This was way bigger than any company I have worked for. Right? There
Yeah.
is this. There's a head TA. There's TA below there. There are like 7 lecturers. So
Geez.
there is, and the assessment obviously at that scale has always been a challenge, and but I completely agree with you. I think we need to find a way to and we to make it real for by just lowering the the student to teacher ratio, right?
Yeah, scale has been such a problem in experiential and authentic assessment for a long time. Maybe AI will give us a chance for this. Sorry, Ryan,
Yeah.
please go.
No, that's great. I mean, it's right in line with there was a really good report from the Digital Education Council towards the end of last year that actually said, okay, 61% of educators are actually using AI. Like they've done something with AI, right? The bar was pretty low, but that meant 40%. Not too shy of half hadn't, right? So what does this kind of shift with AI mean for faculty? Are they learning these tools? I also have a weird kind of bias because I go out and talk to universities, and I tend to talk to the ones that are using AI most aggressively. And so I'm a little biased in how much I think people are using these. But what is a teacher's role using the AI tools? How does that evolve? I think that's a lot of people's questions.
So, one thing which Google came out, there's a blog from Google, which was kind of actually shocking that, and I've forgotten the exact numbers, but they sort of went out, surveyed all the users, not just education users, right, for AI. And actually it's turned out that the super users were both educators and students, right? So very, very, now students were using more, but it was maybe off like by more than 10 points or something, right? It was so I do believe that in one place all of us start using AI, especially the first generation of it, just as productivity tools, right? Just go
Yeah.
out there, help me create my lesson plans, my assessment,
Mm-hmm.
uh, my study plan if you're a
Rubrics. Yeah.
student.
Study guides.
Yeah,
Yep. Yep.
yeah, rubrics and study guides. So I think that sort of happened, right? But I do believe that all the disruptions, the fun, if it stays with productivity improvement, that's only so interesting. Though, yeah, at least in case of education, I'm optimistic that AI will help the educators deliver what I think has been the holy grail. It's like personalization, right? So, for example, in the last change, I was visiting I was really surprised to see, like in a computer science department, maybe I shouldn't have been that surprised, but it's a few 100-person class, and the teacher has already moved to a flipped classroom. So that was kind of the first attempt of personalization, right? So the students do all the videos at whatever in their dorm rooms, come there. She will go out there, have these groups of 4 or 5 students all through the classroom working on a project or whatever, and she and her TAs is trying to sort of help as needed. So I'm hoping that the superpower AI will give to the educators now is to do the personalization, at the next level, right? So
Yeah.
just as a personal story, my grandson, who is like 14-year-old, when I had the chance, I I influenced so that he joined a school called Fusion School. I don't know if you guys have heard of it.
Oh yeah.
They are a
Yeah.
Canvas user. They are
Yeah.
a Canvas user, right?
Yep.
And I love the fact that it's everything is educate, is one-on-one, right? And
Yeah.
my grandson is thriving in it, and that's what obviously there is a to scale this up, there's a cost issue. But so at least going back to your question about educators, I'm hoping AI is the one just gets them closer, right? To
Yeah.
deliver personalization, exactly what tools they use, and we are experimenting with that. I'm sure others are too.
Well, I think
Yeah.
that's one thing that gets lost a lot too is the idea that you don't have to be a graphic designer, you don't have to be a videographer. You can create tools that help engagement in your courses in ways that you've never been able to do before, and I think that gets lost a lot in this as well. So Yeah.
Well, and I want to hold on to this idea. So personalization excites you. What else excites you? Next 5 to 10 years ahead around what AI can bring to either computer science education or education in general, or both.
So computer science, I mean, generally right now, I mean, it excites me to be in this moment, even though there's all this doom and gloom around it, right? I mean, because personally, I don't think it's a Model T moment, right? It's not like, oh no, we have to start worrying about all the people who are, caring about the horses and could drive, driving carriages, like what will happen to them, right? I do think it's one of those moments, more like a calculator moment, or a little bit more boring is that, you came up with a higher level language in computer programming. In some ways, programming was due for a disruption. We have been doing the same thing like that 30 years. I mean, when we went from assembly code to higher level programming. So I do think what excites me right now that the computer science is going to, in various forms, is going to start touching every part of our society. Either maybe in terms of physical AI, in terms of going, I'm hoping, like data science was interesting, right? Few years ago, there were no data science institute programs. Now there are data science programs out there. People are building colleges because that's an intersection of computer science and, say, math, statistics, right? Now I'm hoping that, the computer science, we will see maybe, at the intersection of maybe learning. Wouldn't it be amazing that if we start seeing now learning science and AI, computer science becoming this big sort of area of focus, because finally, in all the stuff that we have been learning in learning science, you can actually deliver it, right? So it comes back to personalization, but driven by computer science.
Yeah, the other I'm going to ask you about the flip side of that, because there is a lot of doom and gloom. There's a lot of the scary stories. In fact, Wired just ran an article. I loved my OpenClaw AI agent until it turned on me. Right? We heard the story of an OpenClaw agent that couldn't make a dinner reservation online because the form was broken, so it gave itself a voice and called the restaurant. Right? You mentioned earlier that level of autonomy comes with risk. But what do we need to be cautious of moving forward? How do we make sure that we don't go down this dystopian path?
No, I think we need a lot to be, sort of cautious about, because if you think about, at least from a technology perspective, the technology's job was to, automate some function, right? So it was supposed to drive productivity. So as a consumer, you knew when you, got into a car or made a phone call, you knew what it was, roughly what it was doing or whatever, right? So you said, make me more productive, get me somewhere faster, connect me someone. But, this is the first time there's a risk that we can actually outsource, ethics to a tool, or we can outsource judgment to a tool or whatever, and not realize. So, I mean, even a tech company, I occasionally get challenged by, hey, but the AI said that my decision making, someone is using it. I have to go compete with, there is a real high risk of actually, as you said, too much autonomy. There's a real high risk of both in terms of our judgment and our biases, but there is a real high risk, of course, which giving AI, just like Claude, giving. I mean, I'm sure you guys are seeing all the stories about it. Will start deleting your emails or start doing random stuff, including the example that you give. And we all need to understand deeply, that AI is just a tool which was trained on a set of data, and the human beings were involved, which is scoring the AI to say, hey, this is a good answer, this is a bad answer, and it was used to train it, right? So the risk is we have to all, deeply be concerned about it, that if you don't educate the people, the risk, is large. And if you think about from a sovereign, in a country's perspective, if you're in Africa or if you're in like India, you're asking AI to pass judgment on a specific period of history, and it is all, it's all has a specific lens. Maybe it was, and I think.
That bias, that bias aspect, that how it was trained, and then I think our own interpretation, that our tendency to anthropomorphize these tools is we've seen that repeatedly.
Yeah, and I remember going back to my grandson's story that like a few months ago, he was like, "Hey, do you think I did that with AI, and do you think it's cheating? And that was like, and it really stopped dead me in the tracks or whatever. I'm like, I don't know. I said, so I could give some really vague answer like, hey, you would know when you're cheating, but very deeply unsatisfying. But but there are these questions like, am I, it's like, how do I interact with AI, which we just are now, and we just need to evolve as a society,
I wish we could come up with all the answers on this podcast, but we will probably end it there. Sanjay, this has been an incredible conversation. I always, your insights are fantastic, and we're kind of shaping the future together. So these conversations are super valuable.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here, Sanjay. There's just so much about this conversation is inspiring, and I hope our listeners can start to think about how they're approaching computer science education in general, and the intersection of AI. So thank you.
Yes, and we'll include some links in the show notes below, so they can link out to some of the stuff that you mentioned. But this has been a great conversation. Thank you, Sanjay.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it.